Hey there, my name is Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 2 years, I've interviewed over 150 people around this question, not to provide you with the universal answer, but to help you to find and define your own answer to this question. On the 30th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, I'm excited to be joined by Lin Cassie Zhen. Cassie is a friend of mine who took a leap of faith and quit her job as a design lead in tech without establishing what was coming next to create space for what would unfold organically. She's currently writing a book as well as producing a podcast called Being Awareness on the topic of mindfulness and inner transmutation. In this episode, Cassie shares her evolution from a relentless pursuit of productivity and life hacks to a deeper exploration of mindfulness and connection, and the shift from trying to control life to placing trust in herself and embracing the unknown. We delve into her methods for creating greater trust and courage, which led her to quit her previous role without a firm next step. Additionally, we discuss the profound influence that nature has had on helping her feel more connected to the world around her. If you're feeling stuck in life, if repeatedly leaning into productivity is not creating the life that you want, if you're feeling disconnected from yourself and knowing what you want in life, this episode will provide you with plenty to contemplate and inspiration for stepping into the unknown. Cassie is someone whose life I've seen change quite significantly in the last number of years, both in her sense of being and in the actions that she's taking in life. So I knew that there'd be a lot to take from this conversation, and I'm sure there will be for you too. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're on the podcasting platforms, please leave a review, as I'd greatly appreciate your support at this stage of my podcasting journey. And so without further ado, the 30th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Cassie, thank you very, very much for joining me on the What is a Good Life podcast today. As I mentioned to you in our little pre-chat there, I don't know where this conversation is going to go, but I'm very intrigued as to how it will go. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Mark. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
So, Cassie, as I tend to start these conversations off, it's with the question of, is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life?
Oof. That's really
typically
tough
the
one.
Response I get.
Wow. I think the question I'm asking myself is always changing. Maybe right now, it could be the question of what is my purpose, perhaps? And that is something that's continuously changing. And at some point, I found that to be a little bit kind of difficult to grasp because, I had this kind of like belief system that there should be one thing that I'm supposed to be doing, or there's one purpose that I'm supposed to have. But as I'm going along with this journey, I'm just realizing that that's probably not the case. Something that is purposeful to me now, it was probably not super purposeful, like, I don't know, a couple of years ago. And also a few years down the line, who knows what's going to change. So yeah, I guess the question with purpose is kind of prevalent in my life right now.
And where is your answer to that? Where is that presently residing?
I think, looking back at my life, I really feel like most of my purpose has been kind of defined for me externally. At least that's like what I kind of believed for a long time. And through, as both of us know about, my journey in the past number of years, that has dramatically changed over time as I got to know myself better and started to remove a lot of now I come to understand as conditionings that I've accumulated over the years. And right now I'm in this really interesting place where I'm kind of like solely relying on myself and I guess my connection with the world and the universe to help me figure out what that purpose is. And it's no longer reliant on like an external source of authority to tell me, hey, Cassie, like you're only validated or you're only living your purpose if you were a design manager, for example. So that's really quite an interesting space to be in, is to just let go and just let whatever's supposed to show up.
Cassie, look, I know from when we met, Cassie and I, for those listening, met in our coaching training, and I've been admiring your process from the outside, as I've mentioned to you before. When we first started that process, you seem to have a tighter hold on life, or like I think a lot of people do, and as you're kind of saying, like viewing the world through this external impression of yourself. I'm just really intrigued for you to, if you could even chart it a little bit of how you perceive your own journey over the last few years to the point where you've given an answer just like that in terms of my purpose is no longer defined in the way you just described.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Like I remember those first days when we met in our training. And I think that was also a really interesting time in my life because so many things were changing around that time. And I think just a few months before we met, I came to realize that there was a giant divide between the persona that I was projecting onto the world. So basically, this person that I have learned to create over the years as somebody that I thought would bring me success in a working environment and how I really felt on the inside. And there was this growing gap between the two sides of myself. And I really felt like if I didn't do anything about it, something was going to snap and it was not going to be
Yeah.
pretty. Yeah.
Yeah, like, because that resonates a lot with my experience, and I'd even say from my experience, it was even in relationships where that persona and gap existed, like confident projection, insecure lunatic inside. Do you know what I mean? And the way you described snap there, I think is ultimately what drove me to further kind of investigations. What was that? What was that feeling like, almost in terms of like generating an awareness of the idea that there's a gap between how I feel and the persona that I'm creating, and it seems to be getting me validation. Do you know what I mean?
Wow. So looking back from where I am today, it's, you know, I'm going to try to empathize with myself as much as possible because I can imagine, like, from my perspective of looking at the world back then, it probably looked a lot different than what I'm seeing it now. But looking back, I remember it felt both terrifying and at the same time, it really felt like, one, I wasted a lot of time chasing something that didn't make me happy. And two, I had no idea what was going to come of this work, whatever I was doing with that bridging of the gap between, let's say, the external persona that I was portraying and also what I was feeling on the inside. And also because it was so out of touch with who I was on the inside, I absolutely had no idea. This was like the world of the unknown that I was stepping into gradually. I was no like I was no stranger to therapeutic work. Back then, I was already working with a psychotherapist for a long time previously, and we did a lot of explorations. But this particular relationship between myself and myself, internal and external, was something that was never explored before. Because what we were exploring before was how to, because I was relating, like, I was so attached to my external persona. That persona, what was what we were working on.
Right.
Yeah,
That's man, we're complicated, aren't we? Like,
absolutely.
so then, just as you've moved through the last few years, Cassie, like what, just out of interest, like what has enabled you to even make some of the choices that you've made over career direction or what to prioritize? Like, what has helped you? What has helped you? What has been most almost effective in helping you bridge the gap between the personas, shall we say?
I think my persona itself has learned to step aside almost. I think that itself, like the kind of like the duality of having an external persona and also a completely unknown part of myself on the inside, this duality was changing over time as I was doing this work. And gradually, what I found was that my external persona, which at one point was pretty much my ego, it started to morph and it started to loosen its hold on me.
Hmm.
And I started to understand the reason why my ego or my persona was holding on so tight to control. It was like a defense mechanism. It was trying to protect myself. And this is how I learned to defend myself over the years. And also through that defensiveness, it gave me a lot of edge in my work. Because, I had a career as a designer at some point, and salesmanship or saleswomanship was a big deal in that kind of job. And eventually moving into a management role, having to work with higher up stakeholders and other stakeholders who are also having management or leadership positions. That kind of authoritative way of approaching things came in very handy. So gradually, it became kind of like a loosening of that part of myself and a getting to know of who I really am on the inside. And I think this shifting of relating to both of these personalities or personas, that gave me some kind of confidence in my choices, because I really feel that the ego or the external persona was acting in a way of feeling like it had to do things a certain way, because this is what she learned that society expected of her, not just society but family and so on and so forth. And actually, I did not really know what I really wanted and who I really was. So by letting loose of that grip onto the external persona or the ego, and letting the inner self have more space, gradually this process allowed my inner self to look at my life and evaluate it from a place of authenticity, I would say.
I love this idea of giving ourselves space. I think often when we're talking about understanding things, it's usually about doing more, reading more, and of course that can be part of the process. But how did you develop the capacity almost to give yourself a little bit more space?
So hard. I remember, wow, at some point, I had a full time job. I had 1 to 3 side projects going at the same time, and I ran a boot camp. So that
Right.
was my life. And like I was so afraid of not doing enough with my time and not maximizing. I was a productivity person, and I was like, "Oh
Yeah.
my god, I want to know all the productivity hacks. I want to know how to like best organize my life so that I can get more done." But I actually had no idea why I was doing what I was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's quite an understandable kind of thing to fall into though, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what we're glorifying. In terms then of you have this set up, this very hectic life, then multiple projects, full-time job, boot camp, productivity, productivity, productivity. How do you begin to create the space?
I remember our first coaching class, actually, that one demo session the teacher and I did together. And I think that was actually one of the turning points, because, like, that session, I was talking to him about wanting to be more creative in my life, because I used
Right.
to draw, I used to paint, I used to do a lot of creative projects for myself. But I found myself having a dry spell for 10 years. And that's like not a short amount of time. I just couldn't bring myself to want to create anything. And everything that I was doing, it felt forced, or whatever was coming through, it felt stiff. So I wasn't in a place of mind where I was able to just freely channel creativity and let things flow. So I remember that session with our teacher, and he was asking me, what did I really want? And I remember, sort of feeling super frustrated with the fact that I couldn't be creative. And it was this
Right.
judgment of like, why can't I do this? I'm supposed to be able to do this. I want to do this, but I just can't do it. And then I said to him, I said, it's not like I can just schedule creativity in my calendar. And every Tuesday, I'm going to be creative for an hour at 7 p.m. And gradually through that exploration, I actually came to realize that I just want to relax. I just want to be. It's not about doing anymore. It's actually what I deeply, deeply, deeply wanted was to just let go of this pressure, a pressure of expecting myself to be creative and to churn some stuff out, and also the pressure of like judging myself for not fulfilling a certain kind of expectations that I may have had for me. So I remember that was like a moment of relief almost. Like all of a sudden, I was like, oh my goodness, it's actually not about doing, it's about being. And I have not allowed myself to be for the longest time in my life. And then what was miraculous was that literally like a few days after that conversation and realization, I was painting. I
Hmm.
created 3 different paintings in 2 days, and it was just like coming and coming and coming. It couldn't be stopped. So that was like the first glimmer into what this really was about.
Yeah, that's I don't know. There's something really. The more I talk to people, the more I kind of get like the sense that the answer is in simplicity rather than the complexity that we're seeking. And I think a big unraveling of this complexity is returning to ourselves. You know, like the stories we have to tell ourselves are so complicated when we're dealing with almost multiple personalities or personas. And I don't know, from there, it seems for you, this realization of like, oh, I've got even just the awareness that this other persona is being created, even that, because I don't believe in any of this absolute, you know, I still have an external persona, and you know, I'm constantly trying to bridge a gap between myself and whatever else, or understand more about myself. But that there's still like, even just that offers a little bit of space that can open up just a little bit of freedom to, as you say, just to exist, to be.
Totally.
In terms then, Cassie, of like how has life been evolving for you since then, in terms of, you know, I know you left your previous role, and I think we talked about it earlier this year, but how did you get to the point where, you know, you mentioned this idea of holding on control, afraid of the unknown. I remember reading a post of yours on LinkedIn when you handed in your, or when you finished up your last job, and I was like, man, that's courageous. Like, or you know, just saying, I don't know where this is going exactly, but it's time for a change. How did you come to progressing to that point in embracing and engaging with the unknown?
That took almost a year.
Yeah,
Yeah. I actually, there, I remember last year around earlier, yeah, last year around March, a number of colleagues were quitting, including one of my team members. And I actually thought that she was being really courageous because she was not going anywhere. She just handed in her notice and said, I'm good. I'm just going to take a little bit of time and then figure it out. And I was like, whoa,
yeah,
good for you. That's amazing. And then that got my gears turning. And a friend of mine at work was also doing the same thing. So she was like, okay, I'm good. I am going to take a break and then I'm going to see what's to happen. And I thought to myself, like, wait a minute, what am I actually afraid of? So instead of just pulling the trigger and say, hey, I'm also going to quit, I actually went into a 6 months long exploration of what this is really about. What are the feelings and fears that are behind this? And if I were to quit, how would I do it? So there was like quite a bit of planning in that, but at the same time, also just like okay with being able to face the unknown when I actually do it. Because, when I actually jump, I don't know what's going to happen next.
and so what a because I guess this is such a this is such a, like, it's become far more of a theme right now these days. Like, and it's almost like there's a contradiction going on. There's a, the economy or the market at times, it doesn't look great, and yet there's also people leaving their roles. And I know COVID and the lockdowns and all that played a big part in people reflecting on their lives and maybe prioritizing different things. But if you don't mind sharing, like, what was your process like in terms of, okay, I see these people, they make these decisions, I think it's courageous, or I admire, there's a certain degree of admiration. What was your sense of exploration, even in what are these fears? What's the feeling behind this? What is this about?
Yeah. So it was actually a lot of reflection together with a number of different coaches and also on my own. And through that exploration, I started to pick apart the fear, because at the beginning, it was just a feeling of fear. It was just like this looming feeling that's like very intangible. It didn't really have any clarity as to what are the components that made up this big thing that seemed to be a monster. And as I started to explore this further, I started to realize that a lot of that was actually fears that I picked up from my parents. And I started to notice when certain kinds of fears show up, I can almost hear my mother's voice.
Oh, wow.
And certain other ones, I can hear my dad's voice.
Yeah.
It was fascinating.
And so you start to kind of examine the landscape, you start to see, even trace back where some of these things are coming from. And then what is this like? Is there a moment? Are there things? Are there kind of projects that are formulating in your head, or even creative ideas formulating? Like, what allows you then to go, okay, yes, there's fear present, but I'm going to step into the unknown.
Last year, I was also working with a group of women, and the exploration was on working with the feminine energies. Basically, meaning like, what are the feminine qualities, and those actually are the qualities of the unknown, of the qualities of a non-linear approach to life, and the quality of letting go, the quality of creating space, the quality of allowing something new to be created within the space. So I think this was very helpful as well in
Yeah,
adding to my understanding of how to approach the world. Because before, I must say that I had a pretty linear way of thinking about life and thinking about what am I supposed to be doing, how is my life supposed to be. It was like point A to point B, I'm always going this way.
yeah,
Whereas in reality, I don't think that's true. And the different side of that perspective was completely missing, like this more feminine way of looking at the world and looking at life. So that actually was helpful. Yeah. To pause there for a second.
yeah. Is there, like, I'm really intrigued by the idea of people when, and obviously it resonates with my own experience of when I quit my job and people were like, "What are you doing now?" And I probably said it in a bit of an obnoxious way of like, "Oh, I'm creating the space or the stillness for an answer to appear." I was probably hamming that up a bit, but that was the intention. Just considering you kind of went with a similar perspective of trying to just let space and let things evolve or let things emerge. How have you found that process of like almost adopting like a new like lens through looking through the world at?
Hmm. Um, in some ways, it came very naturally because I feel it's time for this to happen. But sometimes it was actually terrifying
Yeah,
because, like, the unknown can be terrifying. Especially after living for so many years of knowing exactly what I wanted to do, or exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, or exactly how my life is supposed to be. This is not that.
yeah,
um, so, yeah, I remember a moment in the beginning of this year when I guess like my contract literally finished on December 31st last year. So technically I was still employed until then, but come January 1st, I was unemployed. And that was a moment of truth. So
Right.
when that day rolled around, I was like, wow, okay, so I really am on my own now. I really have space now. I really have nothing else telling me what to do and what my purpose is. I had got nothing. And also, I got no external feedback and validation that I used to get at work.
Right.
Nothing. And it was several moments of terror, for sure.
Yeah. You know what's amazing? Like I spent when I went back to do my last role in finance, I spent like most of my time telling everyone this isn't for me anymore. I'm into all this stuff with meditation and journaling and all this, and this is where the direction my life is going in. And when I no longer had that role to call myself, like when people would ask me, so what do you do? And I didn't just say like, have something to say like business development and helping companies raise money or something like this. Man, I felt so awkward in describing to people what I was doing, even though I knew wholeheartedly I was bought into the idea of why I was leaving, and it was thought through, even though I made maybe a bit more of a rash decision, but I've been thinking about it for a while. I just find that amazing. Like it's almost like a security blanket is taken away.
Yeah. In a sense, I mean, for me at least, the security blanket was almost like this fictional belief of being part of something and being given a purpose by being part of something. And that was taken away.
Yeah,
Yeah. Which I found to be very interesting because
yeah,
when I was part of it, I didn't really understand, I think, the prevalence of that belonging, even though it was not something that I outwardly or inwardly really wanted to belong to, a startup company in the tech business.
yeah.
However, that still gave me a certain sense of belonging and a certain sense of purpose that was something that I didn't need to think twice about.
I've chatted through the course of the interviews that I did. I chatted with some people that were retired, and I'm not saying leaving a role is the equivalent of being retired or something like that. But I was really struck sometimes by people just saying, even if they were really looking forward to leaving a role, how the removal of a block of time in their day where they just had to be somewhere.
Hmm.
And for myself too, like when I was in Peru for the year after I left a role, like I was kind of thinking like, oh wow, like however much every day dedicated to a certain role, it removes all that time you have for thinking or
Yeah.
reflecting or like sitting with your own discomfort at times.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like it's I get the sense that I think a lot of people will be in for a rude awakening when they finally let go of their roles.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. And also realize, even though technically speaking, my job was, I guess, 40 hours per week, I don't think it took 40 hours a week of my mental capacity. Because as long as that job was with me, it was occupying mental space.
Yeah.
And it's beyond the 40 hours which I work for the company.
Oh,
it
completely.
it wasn't until the day that I stopped, I lost my access to my emails and everything, that I started to realize, oh my goodness, now I can actually let go of this thing
Yeah.
and face whatever else is there that's could be both terrific or terrifying.
What's been terrific, Cassie?
What's been terrific is also the part that was terrifying, is
Right.
that utter freedom, taking responsibility for my time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it's funny you say that. In my experience as well, I definitely felt like I had this expression running through my head of people think they really want freedom until they get freedom. And To me, that was just like there was a huge sense of, oh my God, this is amazing. I have all this, I can decide everything. But without the container, an imposed container from somebody else, it also felt quite like, I don't know, just hugely vast or even a little intimidating in ways as well.
Yeah. This actually reminds me of myself when I was around 21 or 22. Actually, yeah, right after I finished university and started working. And I realized I had so much more time now. Even though I had a full time job, I still had all the evenings to myself and the weekends, which I didn't have previously. And I was like, oh my God, now I have all the time in the world to do printmaking, to do painting, to do sewing, to do, etching, whatever I wanted to do. But and then I came to experience paralysis because there were so many choices. I
Right.
actually end up doing nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I forget the gentleman's name that I was watching a video on choice making though, but that's something that is, in this day and age with all these choices we have, even if you go to a coffee shop, there's almost, you've got like 20 choices of coffees as opposed to just filter coffee. He was saying that in all the choices we make, we know all the choices, there's a larger amount of choices that we didn't make.
Mm.
So it almost leads to either complete dissatisfaction with the choice or no choice being made at all. In terms, Cassie, then of just what has emerged that in your life after making this choice that you would have been completely surprised with or about a few years ago? Like what's been emerging for you in the time that you've given yourself this space?
I think it's gradually learning to trust,
Right.
trusting myself and trusting, I guess if you want to go a little more esoteric, trusting that,
Yes, please.
yeah, okay, trusting that the universe is participatory.
Right.
So I participate and there is actually a feedback there. So I think for a long time, I really believed in a world where I had to hustle and hustle hard. And if I didn't do that, I'm going to lose. And this
Right.
was the story that I kept on telling myself, which created this kind of perpetual kind of motion of striving. But now I think I'm just continuously being in the space of like, okay, I am being true to myself. And this is, I'm speaking kind of emotionally and energetically and psychologically, constantly checking in with myself to see, am I on track? And I don't mean am I on track for hitting my goals or am I on track for writing my book, but am I on track in being true to my own values?
Yeah, I think we pay such lip service to the idea of values, and we just kind of think that we pick these things off a list and then that's it. But I don't know. I think that there's when we fully embody those, like and even I love the idea sometimes if we don't know what our own values are, even just to see what we admire in other people. And even
Mm.
if you think of the example there of you seeing a couple of people hand in their notice. And not to say handing in your notice is a value of yours, but just seeing what you admire in the outside of yourself as a way of guiding our own choices as well. Just so when you mentioned the idea of even writing a book, like how has that process even emerged for you? Like what have been has this always been something you would have liked to do? You said before you were very creative for a long time and you had this drought of creativity, but how has that emerged for you?
Mm. It's one of those things that there's a very strong drive, and I always almost want to say a voice inside of me that just tells me to just do it. Get it out, get it out, get it out. It's been nagging at me for a long time, like for the past number of months, and it got stronger and stronger and stronger. And I started to actually write um, around March 21st this year. So that was the day after spring equinox. Right for projects to get started, and that has been I want to say like a interesting experience so far because old me would just power through, just get things done, get things done, get things done. Why are you not doing this? And being judgmental or upset for not making better progress. And I think this time around, it was interesting to see if I just allowed myself to feel the process itself and let whatever wants to come out at the appropriate time, what would happen? So for a period of 3-4 weeks, since the 21st of March, things have been flowing very, very well. I wrote 13 chapters in that time.
Wow.
However, after that, circumstances shifted. I was busy with helping my parents with some stuff, and also traveling from Canada, between Canada and Berlin, has been different. And this time, it didn't feel like the right time to continue that project, and therefore I put it on hold for a period of time. However, that being said, just because I'm not actively writing, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm not with the project. So I think things are churning in the background. I started to have other ideas about how to structure the book itself. During this break, I actually had a realization that perhaps the initial structure of 2 sections was not the right approach. Perhaps 3 sections would be the better approach. And I had these ideas of how could that work and how would that flow differently than the original setup. And also some other interesting concepts and ideas came through during that break time. And I think that's interesting, to be in the cycle of like doing and stopping to let things gestate for a period of time, and then going back to the creative process externally again. So it's this external, internal kind of rotation between the two ways of creating, which I find to be actually fascinating, because I didn't think about creativity or the creative process as being that before.
How would you viewed it before?
Before, I think he was, you know what? Even if it was similar, I don't think I had a very clear understanding of the two components to creativity. I remember in my creative projects, I did spend a lot of time thinking things through. So I would think through a creative project, churn through all these ideas in my mind. And when I feel like, okay, that feels right, and I would put it down into reality, come from here to here.
Yeah.
So this is actually kind of similar, but this time I think I'm approaching it with more intention and awareness. Before, I was simply doing it. And now I'm both doing it and also stepping back to see it from almost like an observer's perspective, and understanding, okay, this is what I'm actually doing. This is the process itself. Now I'm going to go back into the process, and this kind of constant zooming in and out, watching and doing at the same time.
It sounds, I don't know, it sounds very like intuitive or flowy. Like I'm assuming if I lob a few self projections in your direction, that there's some there can still be frustration within this process, or the mind can still get involved and say, yeah, but what is actually happening? But it sounds like you're operating just on a deeper level of trust, or it sounds like you're involved in the flow of it, not even just being in flow, if you get me.
Okay. Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. However, it doesn't mean the mind doesn't get in the way. This is kind of a fun practice of recognizing when the mind is getting in the way, and which actually in itself is a really good opportunity to practice zooming out again. It's just
Yeah.
yesterday my mind was saying, "Oh my God, have you lost all of your skills? What is this crap?" It's not like that doesn't happen.
Yeah. In terms then, the last time we met, you were talking about even just a trip to Canada and being out in almost like in the northern part of Canada and the wilderness, almost like the sheer vastness of of northern Canada and the in minus whatever 40 degrees temperatures and so forth. Like, just, when I was just mentioning there, just the kind of movement or flow, like it seems like you're not only going through your own internal process of, okay, mindfulness, awareness, observing things from a different perspective, deconstructing ideas of who I thought I was, more of yourself showing up into this space, as opposed to a very clear separation between external character and internal. But then also like an observation of nature as well. Like
Mm.
it seems like there's like a quite a, it's both an internal and an external process in what's affecting your vibration or your flow through life.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Being the environment makes a huge difference for sure. Like actually, thank you for bringing that up. Like, I realized, for the past 3 years or so, when I was doing so much inner work, it was really a deep dive. It was in here, and it wasn't much, um, kind of like, there wasn't much done in regards to much relating to the outer world because it was so focused on the internal. But once I was ready to come back out again, I started to practice how do I want to relate to other people through the place that I find myself in now in the inner world. And I think this year is an expansion of that. So instead of in relationships of like one to one humans, I started to notice that relationship with the environment. So when I was in, this year I was in Nunavut in Iqaluit for a month. Now it's a long time to spend in northern Canada, like at the 63rd parallel, for that amount of time in March. So it's quite a challenging environment. But at the same time, I haven't felt more comfortable with myself and my relationship with my environment. And I think that itself gave me a lot of inspiration and also a lot of freedom to focus on my writing. Iqaluit, it's so small. There's virtually no distractions because there's just like nothing but nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has this immersion in nature, has that been was that present in your life? Was that pulsing before, or has that come more from in like an internal deep dive, and then almost like a feeling of connection with the outer world, or how would you kind of describe that?
I've always lived in cities of 3 million people ever since I was born.
Right.
Yeah, the first 12 years was in China, so goodbye nature. And the second half, well, the middle section was in Canada, in Toronto, which was also no nature.
Right.
And then the last 11 years or so was in Berlin. Sure, there is nature, but it's not the vast kind of wilderness type of nature that I encountered in my trips to the north of Canada. So I can't say that I felt a connection with nature for most of my life. Actually, it was the opposite. I felt a disconnect with nature. I didn't understand that humans are supposed to have a relationship with nature, and I didn't really understand the relationship between oneself and other beings
Yeah.
in the world. And actually, it also took a long time to kind of like step back and say, wait a minute, why do we have this worldview of humans being separate from nature and the environment? But very clearly that we're a big part of it. We're all connected in one system. There's no separation between us, human beings, and everything else that we find in this on this planet. So that was the interesting realization to take with me to the north of Canada.
I see this frequently enough, and I think I've even experienced it with myself. Like the almost like when people go more inside of themselves, there is almost like a deeper curiosity around what like about just the or a deeper sense of awe around nature and things that are, I don't know, that we haven't previously felt as connected to.
Hmm.
Like I know even from some of the photos that you were showing me of your trip, like there's just I don't know, there's just some stunning, the complexity, like not the complexity, but even just the sheer awe or the sense of awe that some of these vast spaces or the northern lights or like all these things that they can evoke. And But even just, some of the vast spaces that you were inhabiting with like just nobody else around except you and your partner, like for as far as the eye could see, like I don't know, I think that there's something deeply connecting about those experiences with the world around us.
Mm.
Like how do you see this role of nature? How do you see that playing a part in your continued explorations or evolutions?
What you were saying there triggered something thought for me, because I think I realized before I dove really deeply into myself to understand what this was really about. There was so much noise in my mind. There was just like countless loops of stories playing over and over, and I was obsessed with certain situations or certain things that I didn't have in my life or certain situations that I perceived as negative. My mind was just it was just noise in there. There was not much space. So it was so crowded with all of that stuff that was churning continuously. There was actually no room for any connection at all. And once that stuff was being cleared out, understood and cleared out, and I think gradually there became room for connection. And it's both the connection with myself on the inside and also connection with, what we see as an external world. But really, is there a difference? And I think like it slowly was gradually tapping into this realization that, everything's actually connected and there's no separation between my consciousness and everyone else's or the collective consciousness or the universal consciousness itself. And with that, I think this was probably one of the turning points where I started to experience physical reality differently.
And so this process, Cassie, like for you then, in the sense of even saying that we're all connected, right? Like these things we can't, like, I think we know on some level, but we continuously forget or we separate ourselves very quickly. Is that Has that been, or is that like realization or feeling, whether that's like an immersion in yourself, an immersion in nature through your process? Do you think that contributes to your sense of like your trust increasing, your willingness to like the word, like I love the, like a quote by Einstein where he says like like ultimately we have a choice whether we look at the universe as a friendly place or a hostile environment, and that will be one of the most fundamental choices we make. It seems like you're very much viewing the world as a friendlier place from when you started the process.
Yeah, definitely. I think at the end of the day, I don't know whether there's actually any objective proof because, whatever we can measure is limited to our limitations. And we have limitations that we don't even understand.
Yeah.
So doesn't matter really at the end of the day whether objectively I can prove that everything's connected, or if I were to believe that worldview and that has certain positive effects on my life, does it really matter? So I think like I'm really taking that approach and just enjoying kind of the positive experiences that it's bringing to me.
Cassie, just from all that we've been discussing, you started off talking about this sense of purpose initially, then kind of, or what is the question I'm asking? What is my sense of purpose now? Making the observation that okay, my purpose is changing, or it's evolving as I move through life. But then also the shift you were saying from how you were experiencing the world a few years ago in terms of having this very clear divide between an internal and an external persona, trying to control things, not much kind of space in your life, very, very much productivity orientated, a boot camp, side hustles, a full time job, but then this fear of the unknown. But then things have happened in your life where you've now shifted to almost embracing or welcoming the unknown, and
Mhm.
using creativity, lines of self-inquiry, be it initially with therapy or coaching, but then also meditation, various other forms of exploration, and then even an engagement with nature and an exploration of that, and an exploration almost of the nature of things. But then also this, acknowledging that not all of this is super easy and straightforward in terms of, yes, you've got all this freedom, but be careful what you wish for sometimes. That can also be hard to get used to. But then ultimately feeling a sense of trust in the world, and a shift from almost pushing yourself and grinding yourself to more of a flow or a co-creation even between you and the world itself. As I have the habit, Cassie, of towards the end of these conversations asking, given all we've talked about, what is a good life for you, Cassie?
I think a good life is a life where I am living intentionally and intentionally taking responsibility for my choices, and intentionally not just not doing harm, but doing my best to bring some kind of positive change into the world I see around me. And that doesn't necessarily mean, like, I don't know, building a foundation or whatnot. It could just mean by living a certain way that shows the possibility of an alternative way of being. That could be enough. So I think intentionality and taking responsibility for oneself are still the top points for me when it comes to a good life.
I love this sense, though, of it doesn't necessarily having to mean to build a foundation, but it could just be a bringing a different sense of being into the world. I think that there's such a rush to figuring out what we have to do to change things, and I don't know. Even in listening to your story and also similar stories as well that I've and the different people that I've interviewed, I don't know. There's some shift where, as much as it can be structural change and certain things need to happen, there is also this kind of very important shift, I think, in terms of moving into more of a sense of being, which I don't know. From listening to you and over the course of this hour, I get a very strong sense that shift is happening, or that shift has happened for you quite profoundly over the last few years.
Yeah, I would definitely say so.
Cassie, look, thank you so much for taking the time to join me here on the What is a Good Life podcast. I've really enjoyed hearing more about how your worldview, your experiences, and your sense of being in life is evolving. I'm sure there's lots to take from this for the people that are listening, and I look forward to our future conversations as well.
Thank you, Mark. It's always a pleasure.